Hi, I'm Natalie Rogers, and I'm the Climate Action and Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Milwaukie. I'm here today with Jere, Sonne, our Environmental Services Coordinator for the city, as well as Alexis, Barton, and Shulman from the North Clackamas Watershed Council to learn a little bit more about stormwater and how it has a role on our watershed's health. So Neil, can you tell me a little bit more about North Clackamas Watersheds Council and how you guys work with the city?
Well, the North Clackamas Watersheds Council is a small private nonprofit with an office in Milwaukie, and our mission is to restore health to the Rynearson, Kellogg, Mount Scott, Boardman, River Forest, and Willamette watersheds. We do that in a bunch of different ways. Some of it is on-the-ground restoration of streamside property. Some of it is science and planning. Some of it is working with the city on policy to do things like enact strong stormwater standards. And really to build an ethic of stewardship among the 165,000 people that live in these watersheds.
That's fantastic. And if somebody wanted to learn a little bit more about North Clackamas Watershed Council, where would you suggest that they go?
ncwatersheds.org.
Great. So we're here in North Main Street in downtown Milwaukie, and we can see around us that there's a lot of pavement and water on the ground. Jere, can you tell us a little bit about stormwater and how it gets into our system?
Right, so when we get rain, it's got to go somewhere. When it hits the pavement, it collects all kinds of stuff. And so our stormwater is the rainwater plus whatever it meets along the way. So that can be anything from engine oil and other fluids. It can be pesticides and herbicides. It can be garbage. It can even be residue from tires. Everything that's on the ground, rain hits and carries with it, has now become stormwater. That's important to know because the stormwater has to go somewhere, and a lot of places it ends up in creeks. And so with the rainwater flowing down the street, we're contaminating our creeks. So monitoring the stormwater we have in town helps keep our creeks cleaner.
And what requirements does the city have for monitoring that stormwater?
So DEQ requires the city to...
And that's the Department of Environmental Quality, right?
That is, thanks. And it requires us through a permit called our National Pollutant Discharge and Elimination System, or NPDES permit, to keep the contaminants out of the creeks. And so we have an agreement with them on how we do that. And each jurisdiction is different. And we have a set of rules that we follow and maintain and report on the things that we do to keep the city clean and to keep the stormwater clean before it enters the creeks.
And so do we have a lot of infrastructure under the streets and around the city that we have to maintain?
We do. We have requirements to maintain catch basins and pipes and dry wells and outfalls. And all of that is the system that collects the stormwater on the street surface and carries it to those streams.
So we're here in downtown Milwaukie on the Adams Street connector, and we're taking a look at these brick pavers going through, and surprisingly, this is actually green infrastructure that helps with our stormwater.
Yes, it is. This looks like, if you're not paying close attention, it looks like an average sidewalk. But really what it has is some cracks between the pavers. So when it rains, or in this case when I spill my water, instead of running off the pavement along the surface, it goes into those cracks and sinks in and infiltrates into the soil. And this is another way where we can reduce that impervious surface by doing things like this.
And so when we were walking our way down here, I saw there's a lot of, it looks like sunken gardens and plants along the side of the street. Are those also green infrastructure?
Yes, they are. Those are bioswales. And what happens with those bioswales is when it rains and the water runs off the street, and you can imagine that water is going to carry a lot of oil, a lot of brake fluid, a lot of things that drip out of people's cars. That water is going to run into the bioswale instead of into a storm drain or just directly into a creek. The plants have roots that are going to take the pollutants out of the water. It's going to soak into the soil, start to recharge groundwater, and that's a much more modern way of managing stormwater.
So when the city is doing new construction, and this is a relatively new construction, is this the type of thing that North Clackamas Watershed Council recommends that we do?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, this is the state-of-the-art stuff. This is what we should be doing everywhere. We should also be looking for ways to retrofit the things that were built before we knew how to do this, so that all the things that were built obviously in the 50s or 60s or 70s can be modernized as well.
And you would recommend this as well for folks' own personal homes and private property too?
Yes, this is something you could do on your private property. It's a little more complicated when we get into things like bioswales. A lot of what people can do are things like disconnect the downspout from that runs off their roof into a rain barrel that goes and waters flowers in their garden. And that's a really easy way of reducing the amount of stormwater that comes out of your house and not having to water your garden as much either.
And it makes it a lot prettier to be downtown, doesn't it?
Oh yes, it does.
So Jere, we're now down next to the food cart station in Milwaukie, and it looks like there's just a bunch of beautiful landscaping around us, but this is actually stormwater infrastructure, isn't it?
It is. So the way they design these is water comes in off the street. That's the stormwater we were talking about earlier. And the plants that are assigned to these actually have properties built in for taking out the pollutants. So they're here for a reason. It's certain plants, not just any plants. And we'll get water to come in, it'll settle out. The plants will do their thing and take out a bunch of the contaminants that are in the stormwater. Some of the water will settle into the ground, and the water that's left, either one during heavy flows or just gets enough rain in here, will eventually leave and end up in a storm system.
So if we walk down this way, we see that there's grates in the pavement actually for water to flow through off of the pavement. Is that intentional?
It is. So this is a series of these depressions where stormwater can first come in, and what's overfilled off of one can flow into the next one. And again, we've got rocks and depressions that are going to catch the heavy material. We've got the softer ground that's going to infiltrate stormwater. We've got trees in here doing their part. We got more plants. Those plants are going to again take away those contaminants that are in the stormwater. And eventually we get to an area where we've got too much water. And if we get to that point during a heavy enough storm, the water can then enter the storm system and leave. And that's where we'll head up next.
And it looks like there's all these metal barriers. So it kind of intentionally pulls the water where we want it to pool instead of on the concrete.
That's right. So anywhere we can stop the flow of the water, the heavier material will settle out, and then the lighter water will go over the top with the finer sediments.
And that's why it's important for us to keep trash and other garbage off of the streets to make sure it doesn't end up in our pretty facilities like this, right?
Right.
And so what about this thing right here? It looks like a big pipe in the ground.
Right, so these are honeycombs. These are actually, once we get enough water, the water will make it to this point and eventually will flow into the pipe that's in here. That structure there will collect any of the bigger materials like garbage or sticks or anything like that that would plug up our pipes, and the water will fall in and leave through a pipe system towards a creek.
And so we have all of these pipes that are running under the streets of Milwaukie, and all of those pipes are taking water to where?
Most of them in Milwaukie are going to creeks. Some of them stay in the ground, but the majority of them either go to what ends up in Kellogg Creek or Johnson Creek and eventually the Willamette.
Okay, so water that falls here will end up into our creeks through these pipes. And then there must be miles of them under the city.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Wow, that's a lot to take care of.
It is. We stay busy.
So this is one of the catch basins that the city manages, and you can see that in the water in it, it's kind of dirty, but actually a lot of this water went through some of those bioswales and rain gardens that the city manages, and some of the water came right off the street, which is why we care so much about the water quality in the catch basin, because eventually it's going to flow through these pipes and end down to the river. So over here, you can see that the pipes continue on, and we're right next to the Willamette River here at Milwaukie Bay Park. So Alexis, behind us, it looks like there's a lot of beautiful trees and greenery. That must play a role in stormwater management too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So trees are really a critical part of green infrastructure. When we're talking about rain, when we have rain falling on our trees, that actually intercepts the water on its way to our stormwater system. So having a good canopy helps to slow down that progress of water. And then we also have the trees that are providing habitat in and of themselves. And also when trees are growing along the side of creeks, their root systems are going to help keep that soil together and provide some erosion control, which is also a really important part of our water's quality.
And I think they probably also shade the water and keep it cool, which I think the city has to monitor for stormwater too.
Definitely, yeah. So North Clackamas Watersheds Council is being mindful of all of the wildlife that might live in our creeks, and having a good riparian or creekside canopy will really help to put that shade on the water, which helps to cool it down too, which is really critical for our wildlife.
And as we can see, since it's right down here next to the Willamette where people like to swim and play, it's pretty important for our health as well.
Totally, yeah. So as Kellogg Creek meets the Willamette, it actually provides critical cool water refuge for our migratory fish. So there's a lot of different places where the creeks in the North Clackamas Watershed system put into the Willamette River, and we work upstream to get those trees established along the side of the creek to really help that system be healthy as it works to meet the Willamette.
So even though all this water is now just entering down at the bottom of the watershed towards the river,
Yeah.
what I'm hearing is that it's important even all the way up the watershed for us to manage every step along the way.
Exactly, all the way up. And so we're looking not just at city property, but also privately owned property too, to make sure that they have that good, healthy riparian area.
So Alexis, we learned a little bit today about what the city is doing to manage stormwater in the environment, but what can homeowners do themselves or renters do to maintain healthy stormwater? Is there something they can do on their own property?
Yeah, there are lots of ways to promote healthy stormwater and healthy watersheds. Folks that own vehicles can wash them instead at commercial car washes, because those will actually reuse and filter the water and use less water than what it would take to wash your car at home. What we also want to do is make sure that we're not putting more pollutants into the stormwater system. So things like laying down cardboard if you're working on a leak, or making sure that, we're disposing of our liquids like draining pools into the correct systems.
Assuming that this is really important too for folks who live right next to streams or any sort of waterway themselves, right?
Definitely, yeah. So, flooding is an issue in urban areas, and so one of the really important things that we like to convey is to not actually armor our stream banks, but to rather look at riparian revegetation, because that will help to solve the problem of flooding on more of a watershed scale rather than just an at-home parcel by parcel scale.
And I'm sure it helps a little bit with the pollution coming off of driveways and stuff too.
Absolutely, yeah. Going with riparian revegetation rather than simply armoring your banks will allow you to provide more habitat. It'll reduce the intensity of that water moving through the system and avoid it scouring the banks as much. And it'll reduce the amount of flooding that our downstream neighbors will be affected by too.
And so I've seen kind of some signs around town, and I know this is really important as a pet owner myself, but of picking up pet waste when we're walking.
Absolutely, yeah. Picking up our dog's poop is really important. Bacteria and parasites can build up in our water, and having too much of that input can actually lead to algal blooms downstream too, which can be pretty serious.
And that's really important, particularly as we're right next to this beautiful river that we want to keep clean, right?
Totally, yes.
So if people wanted to get more involved, both advocating for healthy watersheds, but then also stormwater management, what would you recommend that they do?
Yeah, there are a lot of learning opportunities. The Watersheds Council has some online workshops, and so do many groups and organizations in the area. So there's lots of resources to learn about online.
That's great. And so if you're interested in learning more about how you can both get involved in city events, things like our comprehensive plan implementation,
Absolutely.
things like getting in front of city council, all that information is on Milwaukee's website at milwaukieoregon.gov. You can go to the events calendar to learn more about how to talk to your leaders in Milwaukie. So, I think today we learned a little bit about how stormwater really affects our environment, especially this beautiful river that we're standing right next to in downtown Milwaukie. I want to thank North Clackamas Watershed Council and Jere from the city of Milwaukie for being here today and showing us a little around town on some of the important infrastructure and such that we have here. We learned a little bit about what folks can do in their own homes, but is there any last big recommendations that North Clackamas Watershed Council has for our community members?
Well, there's actually two. The first one is we need a strong urban forest. We need to protect the big trees that already exist, and we need to plant more. And the biggest thing that people can do is really be an advocate for that. That's going through a planning process right now. The second thing is that even if you don't live anywhere near the creek, everything that ends up on your lawn or comes out of your car or comes out of your driveway or comes off your roof, sooner or later is going to end up here. And that means there's a lot of things we can do with our purchasing decisions on our own properties.
Yeah, I think that's really important, especially as we're here in kind of off on rainy weather Oregon, as we've seen today. But it's pretty remarkable about how just a little raindrop on our roofs can end up into this beautiful water body here.
Yes, it can.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you all for being here, and let's go see if we can enjoy the last rays of sunshine.
Thank you.